Welcome to this month's Meet the Author program. This month we are treated to two authors who shared their newest books. Kerry Peresta with The Deadening and Linda Lovely with Neighbors Like These. Now sit back and enjoy my interviews with these two fascinating authors. Kerry, I've had the good fortune to just complete reading your newly released novel, The Deadening.
Thank you.
What do you want your readers to feel when they pick up that book and start reading?
Well, I think the first thing they're going to feel is shock, then astonishment, and then as they get past the first few pages, horror. How would you feel if you woke up in a bed, heard voices around you, and did not know where you were, couldn't remember anything, and then you tried to move to ask somebody what's happening? You couldn't speak, you couldn't open your eyes, you couldn't see, and you couldn't move.
You feel that pain when you read it, so that is what I felt, so you're not wrong. Now, I was heavily invested in your main character, Olivia. What was the inspiration for her character?
It's a great story. When I was a new author, my first book, The Hunting, came out in 2013 or 14, and I went to an author signing event, and we were in a library. The authors were all around the perimeter at tables, and people would slowly weave in and out. Everybody's table was deserted except one table where this author was holding court to this big crowd of people, and they would leave with the book happy, chirpy, chatting her up, and we just all looked at each other. Well, after 30 minutes or so of nobody coming by my table, I just made a beeline over to her table and I said, "What is with you? What is your secret? Why do you have all the business and all the audience in this room?" And she said, "Well, it's an interesting story." She laughed. You could tell that she'd heard this before. And she had been in an automobile accident a few years ago, and she had fallen into a coma. They did not think she was going to make it, but she did. And she said when she arose, she was a completely different person. Instead of shy and a wallflower, she was now aggressive and chatty and excited about people and relational. So the thing is, these people, they could not go past her table without her chatting them up. And so she said, "I guess it works because I sell a lot of books that way." That was my inspiration.
Well, that sounds like Olivia.
Yes.
With missing the two daughters, maybe. But yes. Again, I sense just from the way you've been answering that I can understand now you've started some of your writing career in humor.
Yes.
And so magazines, humor, novels,
Yeah.
suspense fiction.
Yeah.
Which do you feel is more fulfilling for you?
Well, I think there's different types of fulfillment. So with the humor column, I did that on a lark. We lived in South Dakota at the time, and I was friends with the editor, and he liked a letter to the editor I wrote, and he asked me if I'd be interested in a humor column, and I said, well, yeah. It's when I first started writing, and I'm like, I would have written anything just to put a toe in the water. And so it was wonderful to write in 700-word sound bites, and I just normally go to a humorous event, and I was a newlywed at the time, and so most of it was about newlywed struggles, which everybody could relate to, although my husband was kind of like, "Hey, would you quit using me?" But that's how I started. It was very fulfilling that everyone kind of knew me around town, and I became a little instant celebrity that way. But I always wanted to write books. And the fulfillment was the attention with the humor and just the satisfaction of getting it done quickly. It took a lot of work, but it was more quick than a book, obviously. The fulfillment with a book is that it takes so much research and so much thought and so much time and so much editing that it is such an accomplishment when it's done that you're just glad it's in print and out there.
Now, you mentioned the research, and I have to go back to The Deadening, and I have to go back to my favorite, Olivia. Okay. Her recovery progress is so central to that book, because as she recovers, she learns more about what happened to her.
Yes.
What resources did you use to get her character believable and keep that story moving? You know, and I guess I'm looking at, remember the old soap opera days when they, all of a sudden had amnesia and the next day they were just fine because they had bumped their head. So you've got this incredible recovery she goes through, this incredible personality change. How did you do that? What were your resources as a writer?
Well, primarily internet. And I didn't really talk to neurologists, but I read a lot of neurological studies and neurologist comments. And what I found out is the brain is incredibly plastic, flexible. It rewires itself after injury in thousands of ways, and that neurologists cannot predict when or if or how the recovery is going to happen, which to a writer opens all these doors of opportunity for creating this wonderful character. But it's quite common. Olivia's injuries were frontal and side lobe. And so those are the centers for creativity, for personality, and for speech. So, and language comprehension skills. And so that was, in fact, I had to go back and change her injury, because after I did the research on the brain, I said, wait, it's the front part of the brain I want to change, not the back. So, mostly the internet, and it was fascinating.
Now, you mentioned how much work you have to put into all of this. So I read that you never read a book once it's completed. And I wondered, is that an author thing just because it's like, I'm just done? Or is it a you thing? And why is that?
Oh my goodness. Well, you can tell by the way I talked about the work. When you write a book, and I didn't know this when I first started out, it has to be edited many times. Not just once, not just twice, but like 5 or something. And that doesn't even count beta readers. So I'm sick of the book. I love the story. I love to think about my characters, and I delight in that finished work. But no, I don't. I've seen it so much. I do not want to go revisit it. For one thing, what if I find an error? It will torment me. So
I never thought of that. Don't want to see your mistakes, that's for sure.
Proofreading, I mean, there's a lot of things that can slip through, even if it goes through 10 people.
Okay, so I was going to finish up with you by saying I've heard there's another Olivia Callahan book in the works, and I wanted a preview of that, but I'm going to quickly jump back to that last question. Do you have to go back and kind of remember what you did with Olivia as you develop the next in the series?
I do. I keep that manuscript open on my computer while I'm working on the outline for the next one.
So, okay, now tell us about the next book.
The next book picks up in Olivia's journey. It's 2 years later. Her older daughter is in college. She is completely sick of all the therapists. She's done occupational therapy. She's done physical therapy. She's done speech therapy. She's done emotional counseling to try to help her regain her memories until she's just blue in the face. So she's left with one fun therapist that is a new character in the next book. But it's about her journey to try to regain wholeness. And she's still not totally there, but she's found that her personality is so jagged and so unpredictable that she's not even sure that she can grasp a career yet, but she desperately wants to have a productive life, to reinvent herself. However, she is learning that she still has to go back to remember her earlier memories, and that includes seeing her creepy ex. So that doesn't go real well.
Well, I'm hoping that day will come soon, that second book will be here. Do we have a title yet?
The Rising.
Okay.
The Rising, and it's coming out the end of March.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing the backstory. Linda, I had so much fun reading this book. Neighbors Like These. I'm not alone, though, because I read a couple of your reviews, and one from your fellow novelist, Tammy Hogue, where she calls it the Twisty Mystery, and it's I'm going to absorb that term from now on.
Right.
So give us the premise of the book, this fun book that you've created.
Well, the heroine is a recently retired Coast Guard investigator, and she lives in the Low Country, and her mother lives in an HOA, and she also has a family friend from childhood who has created a company that manages a number of HOAs. So when the first murder occurs and his company is blamed for causing a caustic environment in the HOA, she doesn't buy it, so she gets involved in investigating what's the motive and why the person died.
Now, this is so relatable to anybody who's lived in an HOA, also known as Sun City. So, were these characters at all personally someone that you might have known? Did you base it on anybody like that?
Well, the characters are all amalgams of people, and yes, everybody that I kill in a book, I've known. So that's one of the joys of writing, is that you are able to do that without any penalty.
Okay.
So that's one of the fun parts of writing, and you can come up with very creative ways to do away with them as well. So
I think a lot of us also fall in love with books that are setting in areas we love. And you've set this in our beloved Low Country. Why that choice?
Well, I've written 9 books, and all but one are set in places where I've lived. And I lived in the Low Country for 12 years and love it. And I also chose it because there are so many homeowner associations in the area. So it gave, if I have one of my main characters managing HOAs, there were lots of opportunities. What I wanted to avoid was the murder she wrote, where you're in one HOA and you've killed off half the population with a series. So this way I can spread out my murders across a number of different HOAs.
Now, a question I had for you, and now that you've mentioned you kill off people, that you definitely have based the character on a real person. How else do you develop your characters?
Well, the heroine, for example, I always want to make sure that they are someone who have the skills to solve a mystery. So in this case, it's a retired Coast Guard investigator, so she has experience in investigating to begin with, so she's not a hobbyist or somebody who is a pet sitter or
Cake baker.
cake baker, right. So she has the tools to begin with, and she's a strong-willed, all of my heroines are very strong-willed, independent women, and smart, and can get the job done.
She's friendly but smart.
Yes.
That's good.
So I did interview a number of Coast Guard retirees to do the book, and I always do that when I'm doing research. And I went on Facebook, I looked for people that were in private groups that were Coast Guard retirees. I found women, and then I called and asked them if I could do interviews with them, and got a lot of background then for the characters. So that's one way. And as far as HOAs are concerned, I've been president of an HOA, and I was in a HOA council that had about 15 other HOA presidents in it. And I've heard a lot of stories.
Oh, they're there, that's for sure. They are there. And as I said, I could take you and drive you around and find some of these characters. Now, your writing resume stretches from technical writing to what I've read is now your favorite genre, the mystery novel. So what was the evolution of that technical writing to what is now your favorite, and why is it your favorite?
Well, the technical writing was a small part of what I did. I was a journalism major, and I did advertising and PR for most of my career. And I was actually living on Fripp Island, and I was approached by someone on Hilton Head who wanted an as-told book written. And so I thought, gee, this would be sort of fun. So they hired me to write the as-told to book. I can't tell you who it is. And I had written about 5 chapters and had the book outlined. And they settled with their family, who did not want this book written. And they then canceled the book. But I had learned at that point that I could write a book, and I had decided in the future I would be in control of whether that book was published. So it was always going to be fiction. And I've always been a mystery reader and love reading mysteries and thrillers. And So that was my natural inclination.
Now, I know that you are a member of a group called Sisters in Crime.
Correct.
Which really, I kind of thought this whole interview might go a completely different direction, but then I looked them up and found out. But I'll let you tell.
Sisters in Crime was started by a group of authors many years ago, Sarah Paretsky and a number of authors that were having a hard time getting their books reviewed in major publications because they only reviewed male authors. So Sisters in Crime started with trying to have a group of mystery writers that were promoting other women authors. But the group has really broadened over time, and in our upstate South Carolina chapter, we've had a brother in crime as a president of our group, and we usually have about 30% of our membership in our local chapter is men, because we try to promote all kinds of diversity in terms of different authors. And our group includes a lot of mystery readers as well as writers, and publishers and librarians. So it's a really fun group. And every month we have a different speaker, and usually the speakers are either other authors or law enforcement. So, you know, we have the medical examiner come, and the coroner, and the fireman, and you name it. So
Sounds like a great group,
It
and
is.
probably very stimulating
Yep.
to get those next books written. And that's my last question for you. What are you working on next?
The next one is another HOA mystery with the same characters. And this one is also set in the Low Country. And one of the beginning of the book, our character lives on a boat. So Kylie is teaching a young man how to sail, which is her sort of surrogate son. And they chance on people that are stranded on an island, and they find out that they were stranded there because the party boat that was taking them left them off the shell and never came back. So they eventually find the party boat, which is empty. And it was a cruise for, what do you think, all presidents of HOA associations. So, and many of them, of course, were clients of the company that she's doing security work for. So,
Oh, I have got some good reading ahead of me. Thank you so much.
thank you. Enjoyed it.
At this month's Meet the Author session, we learned more about our two authors. Kerry Peresta and Linda Lovely interviewed each other with the frequently asked questions they get from audiences during their book signings and presentations. We gained some insight on their writing process and their lives.
One of the first questions I often get is, Linda Lovely, your real name, or is it a pen name? Well, it is my real name. I am married to a gentleman who has the last name of Hooker. So had I changed my name, I was already writing. I was a journalism major in college, and I had a number of articles and what have you under Linda Lovely. So when I married Tom, I decided that Linda Lovely Hooker was not a good idea. So I have continued writing under Linda Lovely. But if I were writing racier books than I do, then I might decide to hyphenate after all. So I've got 9 published books. So again, like Kerry, I will be writing until I have much too much fun killing off people. So I will be writing until my fingers cramp and I can't do it anymore. What led you to become a writer and to write your first book?
Great question. That we talked about before we came. When I was a little girl, my mom would take us to the library on Sundays. Every base that we lived on, there was a library. So we would just check out a big pile of books. I always had 5 books going, ever since I was like 8 years old. And I read with a dictionary by my side. So if I didn't understand the words, there was the dictionary. So I had 11 words very early. I aced all of my writing classes. And quite logically, when I went to college, I majored in art. That didn't make sense. I should have majored in journalism, is what I meant to say. So I was in advertising forever because I majored in commercial art. And after that, when I retired, I just decided, I went back to what were you good at, what did you enjoy? And I just decided that I would pursue that. So I started off with a letter to the editor and it went from there. But I started writing because I had an early love of words, but then life got in the way and I had 4 kids, and I became a single parent and I had other things going on, so I really didn't have the luxury to do what I wanted to do. So I found out that writing was really what I loved. And how about you?
Well, again, I was a journalism major in college, so I've always made my living as a writer, mostly in advertising and PR, which means that I am no stranger to fiction. So I got a lot of practice at that, but I had always wanted to write a book and decided that I would once I could afford not to make any money. So that's one of the things with writing novels. It's a very risky occupation as far as making it big, but lots of fun. So I actually started working on my first book as an as told to book. I was hired to write by some very wealthy people that I can't name, and had about 5 chapters written, and we had a New York agent, and things were going along swimmingly until their family gave them millions not to write the book. So I decided in the future I would write fiction and I would be able to write whatever I wanted, and I would decide if it was going to be published. So
that's funny. So, Linda, what is the premise of your book? What prompted the idea?
My newest book is With Neighbors Like These, and it's a homeowner association mystery. And I have a contract, Kerry and I have the same publisher, for 3 books in the series, so this is the first one. I was at a book club doing promotion for one of my books in another series, and I met a lady who managed HOAs, and she said, managing HOAs can be murder. And I thought, ooh, yes, they can. So I've lived in 4 HOAs. I've been a president of an HOA, and I was in a council of presidents. So I've heard a lot of stories, and I thought this would be really fun to do. And I think the other thing is, you look at like the Agatha Christie, and they were all set in villages, and you had the cast of characters were known to everybody. And that's one of the things that now HOAs are our new villages. So this seemed to be a natural transaction for me to make the stories in HOAs, but I wanted to avoid the problem of killing off everybody in an HOA, like Murder, She Wrote, where half the town has disappeared. So what I have is basically a manager of HOAs, so he manages 12 different HOAs, so I can spread out my murders over a number of different HOAs. So I guess the next question we have is, how important is research to a story?
And
And
you want me to answer that question too?
oh, sorry.
That's
Kerry.
okay. We can move ahead if you
No.
want to. All right. So the premise of my book, now Linda writes mysteries, mine are suspense. So I am not as crazy about murders as mystery writers are, because mystery, the genre itself, demands a murder. So I didn't really know that when I started writing. I just knew that I liked Lee Child and I liked the suspense genre. And so my books are more about the evolution of a character, and along the way, very dark, insidious things happen, which lead to cliffhangers at the end of chapters. And those are the kind of books that I like to read. So the premise of my book was, I wrote the first one, and then I had no idea what I was going to do next. And at my author signing for that book, I I met a woman who was doing a signing across the room. And nobody else had anybody at their table buying books or talking to them or looking at the books except this woman. And everybody was flogging around her table. Everybody was chatty and chirpy and having a great time. Well, I was frustrated, so I just went over to her, parted the crowd, and asked her what her secret was. I said, why do you have all the business? And she's like, well, I was in an automobile wreck a few years ago, which put me into a coma for a year. And they didn't think I was going to live, but I did. And not only did I live, my personality flipped upside down. I became a totally different person. I didn't even know a brain could do that. But your brain can rewire itself if you have a traumatic injury. So that was where my character was born. So that's how my book starts, and that's the premise of my book. It's her journey after a traumatic brain injury and an assault.
How important is research to your story, and how much did you do for this one?
Well, this is always a frustrating question for me to answer because, just to be quite honest, I don't like research. Linda loves research, but I try to set books where I know things, so I don't have to do a deep dive. But with Olivia, because I liked the premise so much, I did research upon research on brain injuries and neurology and reports, and it was so fascinating to me that it didn't even seem like work. So I think the story dictates how much research to do, and whether you have a setting that you're familiar with or not. Some people will have tropical islands that they don't know anything about as their setting, which is very cool because everybody likes those locations, but there's a lot of research involved in that. So anyway, so research is not my favorite thing. And it depends on the story and the person, how important it is. Your turn.
Research is the most fun. And I always find ways to have a lot of fun doing it. My last series was set on a goat farm in upstate South Carolina. So I did goat yoga, and I had a character who was a moonshiner, went to a moonshine place, tasted all the... But with this book, my main character is a Coast Guard investigator. So one of the first things that I did was go on Facebook and look for groups of retired Coast Guard people. And then I found women, and then I asked them if I could interview them. So I got a lot of background of what it was like to be in the Coast Guard, what it was like to be an investigator, what their jobs were, how they had moved around. So that's all background for the character that you can pull in. And again, a lot of fun to do that kind of research. And I just enjoy learning new stuff. So that's part of the fun of it.
So this is the big question. Do you know the end of a book before you start writing it?
No. There are two types of authors. One type is called a pantser. That means they write by the seat of their pants. That's me. I know who my villain is, and I know my villain's motivation. And I know who my heroine is, and she's always somebody that has a skill set that makes her a logical person to do an investigation. And she also has some emotional investment in the investigation. But I always start writing at the beginning, and I let the story develop, and for me that's part of the fun of it. I have to go back occasionally. On my second book in this series, I am now writing chapter 45, and last week I went back and wrote chapter 1.5. So I'm going to have to renumber these chapters eventually, but I go back as I need to and insert clues or people that I want. But to me, not knowing what's going to happen is a lot of fun. So I'm a pantser. How about you, Kerry?
Yes. Well, I never put chapter numbers on my draft, my first draft, because it never stays the same. So I never. By show of hands, how many of you are flippers to the back before you finish the book? See? I knew there were some of you. I have no idea how it was going to end. This time, I I'm trying to be more formulated with the book, because when you fly by the seat of your pants, as I have on all my books so far, there's so much rewriting involved. It just takes longer, so I'm looking for a way to try to put out a book a year and then have a formula. So I'm trying this time outline, sketching each chapter on some software that I found and trying to organize it that way. We'll see how it goes. I'm not sure if I'll enjoy it or not, but I will not know the ending. So.
Well, speaking of enjoyment, what do you enjoy most about the writing process, and what do you enjoy least?
Okay, well, obviously research. But I love character development. I love my books. I'm very invested in the characters that I write about. And I love thinking about crafting these characters, and I love to give them quirks and cool personalities. And I just like people. I like people. I like to talk to people. I like to find out what you do for a living. I like to know your past history and how you got to where you are. And so I enjoy building people based on all these people that I've met. Also, I really enjoy building the bad guy. Do you guys love the bad guy in the book? You are the villain, wonder what he's like. So I craft those on bad dating relationships or different, my daughter's bad dating relationships or whatever. Then I just craft this great villain and I exaggerate and twist and pull and make them worse. But then I make my protagonist, which at this point has always been a woman, the protagonist always gets back. There is some kind of retribution for the guy. So that feels real good. So characters is my thing.
Well, I have to admit that killing off people is the most fun of my... None of my characters are recognizable to the people that I've killed, but I know who they are. So the first book that I wrote, I gave a beta read to a fellow worker, and Cameron said, I know you changed his background. I know you changed what he looks like. I know you changed his education, but I know who he is. So I changed him into a woman. So I said, if he recognizes himself now, he's in real trouble. So.
Yes, my first book I had to learn about liability issues. Because if they're recognizable at all, then you can be sued if it impinges upon their productivity in work or their reputation. So I didn't know that at first, so I had to change mine too.
But seriously, probably research and the actual writing are both fun for me. The one thing that I really do not enjoy, I love meeting people and going to bookstores or coming to events like this. I hate Twitter. I hate the social media because it puts so many demands on you that is time that I'd rather spend either researching or writing. So
Linda, how do you choose a setting where the book takes place?
I've published 9 books, and all but one have been set in places where I've lived. I have 2 series now set in the Low Country. I have a series set in upstate South Carolina, and I have, the one exception is my sister lived in Jamaica for 7 years. So we would go down and visit, and I couldn't resist having one of the books spend a lot of time in Jamaica. So, but other than that, I want to know the area and be really familiar with it. So that's how I choose my settings. And for this one, there were just so many homeowner associations in the Low Country that doing an HOA series, it made a lot of sense to have it set in this area.
And how important do you feel setting is to a story?
I think setting is great. I mean, it can be an actual character in the book in terms of suspense, especially in terms of how you deal with each other and what the elements are like. The weather can be a factor, so all lots of fun. How about you?
So far, it's been places I've lived. So this book that I brought tonight is the setting is Maryland, because we had just moved from Maryland a few years ago. And it's beautiful where my protagonist lives. It's horse country in Maryland. And but then they vacation in Hilton Head. So I kind of worked both of them in there. My first book, my first book, I can't even remember where my first book, I think it was also Maryland, I can't remember. Anyway, it's been like since 2013 that I wrote that book. But I think setting is extremely important, and it can set off a scene. Like I use it for background. I've never seen that, those classes that say using character as setting in writing conferences we all go to. Have you been to those?
I've taught one.
You've taught one, of course. Yes, so I don't understand that setting as character. I'd like to explore that idea, but I use it as enhancement to the scenes, to the chapters. So, and I always describe that in my books, I don't get so much into setting as I do the character development. So the action and the character development is primary, and the setting is the setting for the action.
Well, I think an example is Pat Conroy in terms of location being a character in his books. And if you read any of his books, that's the case.
Yeah, it's very important in those books. That's a loaded question.
Yeah, how much of yourself do you put in your characters, and how much of your experiences?
Well, a lot. I think any author would tell you that their past, their experiences, their travels, the people that they've met, all of those go into making their protagonist, especially, and the bad guys, all of that. But what happens is it becomes a composite. It becomes a composite of all the people you've met. And if I notice someone, like my friend Brian here, if I notice someone that has some kind of endearing little tick, which you don't, I'm just using it as an example, I'll put that in a character because it's charming, it's endearing, or it's attractive, or same thing goes for the bad guys. If he does something that's real irritating, well, I'm throwing that in there too. Or the way they speak, or different things. So, a lot, I'm just saying a lot. I don't know how I would just write a character from scratch. I was thinking about that sci-fi, I guess. They make things up. They make up worlds. They make up all of that. I'm more of a composite of the people that the person I am, and those people around me. How about you?
Same. If you look at my books, I have heroines that have lots of different occupations, and they live in different places. But they have one thing in common. They grew up in Iowa. And they moved here for various reasons. They'd have different career paths, but that's where I sort of have the inability to imagine myself growing up, since I grew up in Keokuk, Iowa, imagine myself growing up in New York City, or the experiences are just so different. So my heroine always brings that background with her into her setting wherever she lives. And it's just one of those things. But yeah, experiences, things that you've run across are very important in terms of developing the characters. And remembering also that the villains are heroes in their own mind. So they have their own arc, and you can't just treat them as blanks. So it's fun to imagine what they're, and again, doing the composite thing that you're talking about, finding what's interesting in them and what's driven them, and looking at experiences to bring to that.
What fellow writers inspired you? What do you read, and why?
Well, I read mysteries and thrillers and suspense. As far as authors that have inspired me, Stu Grafton was the first author that I really got hooked on that had a female protagonist who was independent. She didn't have to depend on a man to be doing the job with her. And so she's one of my heroes and models. And I don't know whether any of you have read Susan Isaacs. I love Susan Isaacs' books. She has written everything from Compromising Positions, which is a humorous mystery, to a World War II book that is set a spy story. And I think that I like Susan Isaacs so much because she writes what appeals to her and doesn't worry about crossing genres, which apparently I don't either. So, and she's just so much fun to read. She's just great. And then Janet Ivanovich. I mean, her first 7 books in that series, I think, are a class in themselves on writing humor. So those are 3 authors that I've really enjoyed. How about you?
Stu Grafton. It seems to be suspense, thriller, mystery authors, especially women. They love Kinsey Millhone. Have you guys read Stu Grafton's? How many have read the whole alphabet? Look at that! See? Once you get hooked, you can. Yeah, she was the leader in the mystery. She wrote just mystery, right? I mean,
yes.
She was a cozy, but her character was very edgy.
Yes.
So I loved Kinsey. Remember, she didn't have any dresses except one. It was a black dress for formal events, and she crumpled it up and threw it in the bottom of her closet, and it was unwrinkleable, so she just took it out and put it on if she had a dress-up event. Otherwise, turtlenecks and jeans. I loved her. She was very edgy, and so my characters do have some of Kinsey in them because I loved her so much, and because she was unpredictable and unexpected, and that's how I like my protagonists to be. You're never quite sure what she's going to do next to make some fun. So Stu Grafton and then Lee Child. Do you have any Lee Child readers in here? I love Lee Child. And I've read probably, I don't know, 3/4 of his books, but my favorite one is 61 Hours. Anybody read that one? Is that great? I mean, it's like we are told as writers, when you want to up the suspense, put a clock on it. Well, he did it literally. So 61 hours, every chapter is an hour. And you're just like this. By the time the book is over, it's just genius. Louise Jensen, the British suspense authors put out such dark, edgy stuff that I can't even describe it. But Louise Jensen she's a newcomer to suspense, and she's so dark, but it's not dark where it's graphic and violent. It's just dark that people would think that way. And so I love Louise Jensen just for her grit, slant on things, and her excellent writing. And Tess Gerritsen, one of my favorites forever, Tess Gerritsen, medical thrillers. And she was a forensics examiner, I think. And so she can write so realistically and interestingly, because my character is in a coma when the book starts out, and then so everybody's dying to see what happens. She's had a brain injury, and so there was a lot of research that went into how a brain heals, what lobes do what to a person, and how this person reacts. Do they get their memory back? Do they get their speech back, their movement back? And so Amazon has classified my book as a medical thriller. I never wrote it to be a medical thriller, but that's where it's selling the most in that category, so that's hilarious. Really, my books are psychological suspense. That's what I aim for.